there's big money involved when we're talking about rural crime. Very devastating for everyone, and it impacts everyone as well.
It's super deeply distressing for the farmers to have to deal with the aftermath of that. You know, that loss of livestock, it's not just economical, it is also emotional.
Hello and welcome back to ScotLand Matters, the podcast from Scottish Land and Estates, where we discuss the big issues shaping rural Scotland, from policy and business to communities, land management and the rural economy. I'm Cameron Gillies, Head of External Affairs at Scottish Land and Estates, and your host for today's podcast. This week we are talking about an issue that affects rural Scotland in a very direct and often deeply personal way: rural crime. That can mean many things. It can mean theft of machinery, fuel or equipment. It can mean fly tipping, hare coursing, vandalism, poaching, wildlife crime, or criminal activity taking advantage of isolated homes or farms or estates. But at this time of year, with spring lambs gambling around our fields and calving in full flow across Scotland, there is one issue that comes into particularly sharp focus, and that is livestock worrying. For farmers and land managers, the consequences can be pretty devastating. Sheep can be chased or injured, they can miscarry or in some cases be killed, and cattle can be badly distressed. Dogs themselves can also be put at risk, and for already fragile rural businesses, the financial impact can be pretty severe too. So this is not only an animal welfare issue, although it certainly is that, but it's also an economic issue, a public responsibility issue, and a reminder that access to the countryside has to go hand in hand with respect for those who live and work here. So to discuss what can be done practically and constructively and collaboratively, I'm joined by two guests who know the issue extremely well. Firstly, I'm really pleased to be joined by PC Fiona Drummond, a police constable on Police Scotland's rural crime team, working directly on tackling rural crime and supporting communities affected by it. And also my colleague, Nick MacLeod, a farmer, a member of the Scottish Partnership Against Rural Crime, of course a colleague here at Scottish Land and Estates, and someone who has been a consistent champion of preventing livestock worrying and improving understanding between dog owners and rural businesses. Nick, Fiona, welcome to the podcast. Fiona, I'm going to start with you. It would be really useful to start with a sort of broad picture. So when Police Scotland talks about rural crime, what sort of offences are we really talking about?
Well, when we talk about rural crime in Scotland, we're referring to quite a broad range of offences that can have quite a significant impact on the rural communities. You've got farmers, you've got landowners and businesses. And it's not just isolated incidents. These crimes can affect the livelihoods, animal welfare, mental well-being, and the wider rural economy. So through the Scottish Partnership Against Rural Crime, it's often referred to as SPARC. Police Scotland work with around 22 partner agencies and organisations such as NFU, Scottish Land and Estates, and the Scottish Government in Crime Stoppers as well, for example. And we basically focus on rural crime priorities. And these priorities include livestock offences, theft of machinery, fuel, equine incidents, environmental such as fly tipping, and a new trend that we've got is infrastructure, which is metal and renewable energy crime. So the important point is that rural crime is not just low-level crime. For victims, the consequences are often devastating, both financially and personally.
Do you think there's sometimes a bit of a misconception that rural crime is somehow less serious than what goes on in cities?
Yes. Livestock worrying, for example, is treated, the perception is a lot less as people believe maybe that their dogs are maybe just playing or they're just getting a good run about the field. But in fact, it is a very catastrophic incident that farmers deal with on a very regular basis, specifically during the kind of Easter period. And now that it's since COVID, there's a lot more dog owners. So there's more an education piece that's required to support the new dog owners and existing dog owners on understanding their responsibility and any support they require when they're out and about in the countryside. But yes, there is a misconception for rural crime. There's big money involved when we're talking about rural crime. Very devastating for everyone, and it impacts everyone as well. You know, we require the farming industry to basically feed the nation. You know, and that may be indirectly through crops, etc., or through animals as well. So yes, big issue, and it affects everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a really important issue to raise. And Nick, I'm going to come to you a little bit on that, because from the perspective of someone who lives and works in rural Scotland, in terms of your work on a farm, how does rural crime affect day-to-day life and business confidence, I suppose, for you as well?
I think the impacts can be huge. I think where it's maybe perceived as being a kind of smaller crime, for example, even a small amount of fuel theft, those sort of things have a really disproportionate impact. Where it impacts your forward planning, maybe what you were planning to do that day, that week, that month. It can also be, farms work to tight margins for a lot of the time, and you need to be conscious of what you're putting out. So those sorts of things really do have a really significant and negative impact. I think all thefts and all incidents, fuel theft, tool theft, antisocial behaviour, livestock worrying, all of these things can interrupt your day-to-day operations, and they create real financial strain, emotional strain, and that sort of stress added to your day-to-day running of your business.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, at this time of year, livestock worrying is a particularly important issue. And lambing and calving are obviously a pretty high pressure period for farmers. And the consequences of dogs worrying livestock can be severe. So, Nick, you have done a lot of work on livestock worrying. For those who don't see the impact firsthand, could you explain a little bit about what actually happens when livestock are chased or attacked by dogs?
Yeah, I think it's sort of not an isolated incident. Like Fiona said, there are peak times of the year where we do see that happening more often. More often than not, it's when the general public have more access, they're off for certain holiday periods, the weather starts to get better after quite a rough winter like we had this year, for example. And so you do see spikes at that time of year. And even the sort of chasing and if there's lack of physical harm, it doesn't need to necessarily be an injury or a death to livestock. Even that stress alone of being chased can cause pregnant animals to abort, reduce your sort of weight gain, and lead to longer term health issues in the long term. So I think that's a really important point to take into consideration when it's not just about the dog actually making contact with the livestock. There's a bigger picture here. It's also super deeply distressing for the farmers to have to deal with the aftermath of that. That loss of livestock, it's not just economical, it is also emotional. You spend so much time rearing these animals, maybe picking certain genetic lines, looking forward to seeing your spring lambs thriving in the fields, and then to have that taken away from you is the last thing that you want, and it's really, really upsetting. I think where we can look to sort of mitigate these opportunities for farmers to sort of have an outlet to contact Police Scotland and have that be listened to, it's really important because it's such an emotional topic.
Yes, it's actually quite interesting. I don't think we speak enough about the emotional impact of this, particularly when, lambing and calving is already a really high pressure period for farmers. There's already that emotional investment in it. So when something like that happens, I can imagine that must be hugely emotionally challenging. Fiona, from a policing perspective, though, how serious is livestock worrying, and what should dog owners understand about their responsibilities and the potential consequences of failing to fulfill those responsibilities?
Well, legislation changed or it was updated back in 2001. So we now have more powers than we did previously. So, for example, we can now seize dogs. We can gather forensic DNA. We're also pursuing more robust investigations. There's larger fines, imprisonment from that, and maybe dog owners may not know that farmers do have legal powers in certain circumstances to protect their livestock from dog attacks. And this is um, basically shooting the dog, at sight. But again, with that, it needs to be at the time that the dog is physically committing the offence of livestock worrying as such, albeit it's the dog owner is responsible for it. So dog owners need to understand one very simple point, saying my dog would never do that isn't a defence. Even well-trained dogs can react instinctively around livestock. It's just their instincts. So owners have a responsibility to keep their dogs under proper control and safe, keep them safe, particularly during lambing time when they'll see quite a few fields containing livestock, newborn lambs, etc. And if in doubt that they believe that there's maybe animals in the field, just move to another area. It's and basically you're keeping yourself, your dog, and the livestock safe. Livestock worrying remains one of the most emotionally and financially damaging issues that we deal with, as Nick had mentioned. People sometimes think dogs are they're just playing sheep, they're just messing about. But even a short incident like that for a short, a couple of minutes can have devastating consequences. Miscarriages, lambs being separated from their mothers, entire flocks being destroyed, stress and panic, loss of bloodlines. And I've known of a recent incident whereby there was about 18 lambs that had died as a result of livestock attack. 24 hours later, there's even more lambs that had died as a result of the stress. And it is just heartbreaking. So as part of Spark, that's what we're all about. We're working together in partnership, collaboratively, to create positive engagement with dog owners. And as I say, since COVID, more dog owners, and it's just more awareness out there. And there's so many organisations that can provide the support and training to allow everyone to enjoy and explore the countryside in a safe manner. So message is clear, prevention is far better, dealing with more so than the consequences.
It's really good to hear some of that sort of first-hand experience of what you see in your sort of day-to-day work as a police officer dealing with these issues. And a lot of livestock worrying incidents aren't caused by people setting out to do harm. They're mostly because someone thinks their dog isn't under control, and until it suddenly isn't. Nick, what would your practical advice be to dog owners who are walking in the countryside at this time of year?
I think it's about responsibility. Is a huge aspect of having a dog. Not only that sort of initial training, but that responsibility of the impacts that your dog may have on others. I think the key message is very simple: keep your dog under control at all times, whether that be on a lead, and just avoid fields with livestock. I think where you don't know how that dog will behave, I think a lot of the assumptions, as Fiona said there, it's about that my dog wouldn't do that. I think you don't know until you're in that situation, and it's just better not to risk it. I think instinct can take over very quickly in those scenarios, and I think obviously pay attention to any signage that is up and really be aware of your surroundings. And if you do encounter livestock unexpectedly, just calmly and quickly move away. I think avoid fields with livestock for the safety of yourself and your dog and the livestock.
I think that's a really strong message, and two really clear messages coming from Police Scotland and from SLE. So that's always good to hear a lot of alignment on that. Of course, responsibility doesn't just sit with one group. We also want this episode to be useful for farmers and estates and rural businesses who want to reduce the risk of incidents and know what to do when they do happen. So, Fiona, looking at rural crime more broadly as well, what practical steps can businesses take to protect themselves from rural crime?
Quite a few things. Basically, we always talk about target harden. Look at the layers of security that you have in place of your premises. Start from basically the entrance of your property and work your way in. There is some really good products out there that don't cost a lot of money. Sometimes it's just change of habit. So you can get driveway alarms. You can consider CCTV, lighting, good quality padlocks. But all these products are good and well, but it's, as I say, it's just a layer of security. The more layers you can do, the better. But a lot of it can be just remove the keys out your vehicle. First of all, shut padlock sheds where it contains valuables. Don't have your code bikes on display if you're jumping in for lunch. Don't have the keys sitting in the yard, open for anyone just to jump on and go. Keep them locked up and put away. It might be a couple of minutes of your time, but that could be a difference of keeping your product or losing. wasn't it? And farmers need these pieces of equipment, for their day-to-day working. And if they disappear, machines, tractors, you name it, quad bikes, it affects their production. And when it comes to internals of the sheds, again, just consider the use of padlocks, anchor locks, quad bike locks, etc., wheel locks, anything you can, trackers. Yeah, all we can do is try and eliminate it, make it less attractive. And if you have any ongoing incidents such as livestock worrying and it's ongoing, it's 999 call, because it's an ongoing incident, threat to life. And what 3 words is really good because it allows cops who maybe are in a more, or farmers that are in a more remote location, to let the officers know exactly where they are, where they need the help, and just let us know as much information as you can.
Lots of great practical tips there, Fiona. Thanks for that. One thing that you both kind of alluded to quite a lot, and it comes up again and again in rural policy, is that rural Scotland works best when people are working together. And I don't think rural crime is any different, really. So when we get police and farmers and estates, communities, dog owners and local authorities, all these representative bodies together to tell them that they all have a role to play, I think we get the best results. So even in the Scottish Parliament, we're hearing early signs that we're set to take some action on rural crime through a private member's bill coming from Borders MSP Rachel Hamilton to help prevent the theft of farm equipment. So a question for both of you, I suppose, how important do you think partnership working is in tackling rural crime? I'll come to you first on that, Nick.
I think it's huge. I think if we take livestock worrying as a prime example, it's that consistent messaging. It's across the board at the sector and all the organisations, not only those that are partners in Spark, but also wider than that, to say this is something that we're all, really understanding of, something we need to be more responsible about, sharing that message out to reach as wide and as broad an audience as possible. I think that messaging is really key. I think also that partnership working of sharing information, of having resources to share, such as using Spark as an organisation, that for us, it really helps us to be able to kind of share information with like-minded organisations, to look for trends, to look for patterns, to help encourage members of both us and other organisations to report, to keep us informed, to be able to try and collectively educate as wide as possible. I think the campaigns that focus on sort of simple, practical solutions, such as livestock worrying, something as simple as putting your dog on a lead can mitigate that incident. I think that's really important. So I think when there is alignment across the sector, that's really effective messaging.
Obviously, Spark is a huge part of bringing all of these organisations and bodies together. Fiona, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you work with local communities in other ways, and if there's any examples of partnership working making a real practical difference there.
Yeah, quite a few. So from my personal experience, I had created a few events called Protect Your Pooch. And it was really just from a dog owner's perspective for livestock worrying, instead of giving the waggy finger as to keeping your dog in a lead, understanding why and how you can get the support for this. So I'd organised this event in partnership with the local authority, British Horse Society, Dogs Trust, amongst others. And it turned out really, really well, and it provided people, members of the public, dog owners, dog trainers, etc., with the tools to basically understand the legislation more, and to assist if there may be a new dog owner. How do you get this dog on a lead? I've never put a muzzle on a dog before. Dogs Trust were there to basically demonstrate and provide free online training for that, or in person. So that's just one example that we had, just raising awareness. And we also had Pollock Park, the rangers from there. They had an incident with Highland cows where there was a livestock attack a couple of years ago. So through our kind of social media platforms and our partners, we were able to raise awareness of that. And furthermore, we've got a few ideas in the pipeline to increase this engagement with members of the public. And we're not an expert at everything. We don't have all the skill sets or access to all the legislation. And that is where partnership working is vital in basically tackling these issues.
So looking again at rural crime a bit more widely, Fiona, what other types of rural crime are you seeing most frequently or perhaps most concerningly at the moment?
Well, there's been an increase in quad bike thefts. We've seen an increase in infrastructure crimes, so that is theft of renewables. If you look at the landscape now, more than ever, we're seeing more solar farms, battery storage, etc. And the money put into this is colossal. And where there's renewables, there's a lot of metal, utilised copper, and copper at an all-time high, I think sitting at £9,500, £10,000 a tonne. It's very attractive for thieves. Um, Other crimes, fly tipping is always a challenge that we've got. Equine crime. So there's campaigns like Lose the Blinker that we've got in place. We've also got fuel theft is a big one as well right now, given the current war that's ongoing. There's a shortage and the value of it is extremely high. So again, a lot of rural communities are facing these kind of crimes. And 97, I don't know if many folk know this, but 97% of Scotland is classed as rural, and 17% of our population live in these rural environments. So a big, vast area with a small number of residents. We are um, we are high victims of crime, and it's very low risk with high reward as well. So again, more appetising for thieves to venture into these rural communities. So that's where we just encourage, if anyone sees any suspicious activity,
Yes,
just parked up, just report it. Let us know.
Fiona, those statistics are ones we use a lot to try to demonstrate the importance of rural Scotland, but I think it's really interesting to view them through that lens as well and how hard that makes your job. I mentioned the potential introduction of a new bill in Parliament about tackling machine theft specifically, and it's something they've done down south to mandate that that people selling equipment have to fit immobiliser and forensic markings on them before sale. Do you think that's something that might actually help, or do you think that might just get lost in the ether of everything else that's going on?
Absolutely. It's another layer of security, and that's all we can ask for. The more deterrents there are, the better it is for members of the public, for farmers, for the contractors, etc. So yes, I agree.
Good stuff. Well, glad to get your seal of approval on that. I'm sure Rachel Hamilton will be pleased. Nick, I want to talk a little bit about what rural crime feels like from a business side. Is it the direct cost or the feeling that your home and workplace have been violated that is a sort of major worry for you, or rural businesses more widely?
I think it's a mixture. I think where it seems almost personal because you generally live and work rurally. I think you're tied so much to the community around you, to the land around you, to where you live, to where you work, to where you spend your time, and it's that's your environment has been invaded in some way or another. I think it's just a really an impact on how secure you feel, not only at work but at home. I think that's really quite concerning. That's a massive impact. So like you said, there is a financial impact to it as well. But again, it's the stress, maybe putting off something you'd been planning to do. For example, if you run a dairy farm and you don't have a quad bike to bring your cattle in for morning or evening milking, that's going to halt your production and really impact your not only your animal welfare but your business as well. I think where we're seeing a rise in certain thefts, for example, GPS, again, that can put your production down. That is very much a kind of forward planning where you set out maybe days, weeks, months to do certain work, depending on weather. You've maybe postponed certain things. That's where it really becomes even more impactful than just that monetary value of having the thing stolen as well. I think widely as well, it can really cause frustration where there are victims of rural crime who don't report it, and where then the statistics are not showing up as accurate as possible, and therefore resources aren't efficiently allocated because of the underreporting. So I think that's a really huge aspect of it as well, to make sure that when you are hit by any variation of rural crime, no matter how severe, or if you don't feel like it's really significant, it still matters and you should still report it.
We are coming to the end of this episode, but I do have one kind of final question. If each of you could leave listeners with one practical action they can take to help tackle rural crime, what would it be? I'll come back to you first, Fiona. From a policing perspective, what's the single most useful thing people can do?
Report and protect. So report anything suspicious, report any loss, i.e. in kind of rural crime, and try and protect your equipment and yourselves where possible through layers of security.
That's simple and clear. Excellent, Fiona. Thanks for that. And Nick, for dog owners and people who are visiting rural Scotland, or farmers and land managers and all local communities, what's the one thing that would make the biggest difference?
I think that take responsibility for your actions. I think educate yourself on where you're going, what you're doing. You know, if there are certain bylaws in place for certain areas that you wish to access, or, you know, risks involved like wildfire risks and things like that. Those are things you should be aware of if you're taking access, and that know that one small action that you may take to prevent something from occurring or protect something by reporting something you've seen that's suspicious. All those make a huge difference in being able to protect the countryside for the future.
Good stuff. Nick, Fiona, thanks so much for joining us for this episode. I think what really came through in the conversation is that rural crime has real consequences for people, and obviously for businesses and animals and communities. And that conversation about the emotional impact, I think, was really interesting. And when it comes to livestock worrying in particular, I think there's some really simple, clear messages there. What might look like a harmless mistake can have really devastating consequences. So keeping dogs under proper control around livestock, respecting the signs, reporting incidents, and understanding that the countryside is a working environment are all really practical bits of advice I think we've gotten there from Nick and Fiona. Rural Scotland is open and welcoming and full of opportunity, but it is also home to businesses and families and livestock and livelihoods, and tackling rural crime is about protecting all of that. So thank you very much again to our guests, and thank you as ever to everyone listening to ScotLand Matters. Until next time, goodbye.